All right. All right. Welcome back, students. Back here doing our next read aloud. Be picking up where we left off in the Blackthorn Keys. So I'll wait here for my students here to join us. All right, we got one. I'll wait a little bit for a couple others to join before I get started. That way, not too many people miss the beginning of the story today. But kind of as a quick recap for those that are still trickling in, we read the first two chapters in the Blackthorn Key where we got to kind of meet Christopher Rowe, our main character, and our point of view character, because the story's kind of being told from his perspective. And we got introduced to a world that is somewhat different from our own, as this story takes place in the past, about 400 years in the past. The year is 1665. So if you guys want a point of reference, that is roughly 100 years before our ancestors here in America decided to declare independence from the King of England. So if that kind of fit into your frame of reference of where we're at in history, that kind of gives you kind of, at least on the timeline, that, this is 100 years that predates our War of Independence or War of Revolution, whoever that you are talking to wants to call it. But we got to meet Christopher, who is an apprentice. So he is training to become an apothecary, who is a maker of medicines, a maker of potions, and you could kind of throw in there kind of a chemist as well. And we kind of open up with the story with Christopher is in his master's apothecary store. So his master is Master Benedict. That's his master, the one who is teaching him the skills of the trade. Christopher's minding the store while Master Benedict is out, and he has his good friend Thomas over. Thomas is the son of a baker that lives close by. And Christopher was snooping around one of his master's recipe books, and was able to decipher the code used to keep this recipe a secret, discovered that it was a recipe on how to make gunpowder. And he got it in the idea that him and Thomas needed to make a cannon. Now, as it was established, only select apothecarists were allowed to make black powder. Black powder, you could say, was a controlled substance that the crown, or in this case the King of England, was the one that had to grant permission for you to be able to make said gunpowder, because it's a dangerous substance, being highly explosive. But Christopher thought, it's a little cannon, we'll be all right. Well, things didn't end particularly good for Christopher, as he was aiming the cannon for one of his master's iron cauldron, the bottom, figuring that might be a safe thing that we could target. Well, the recoil of the cannon unfortunately hit Christopher right in the groin. So his groin area is not feeling very good. It's like almost worse than someone like kicking you where the sun don't shine. In this case, he had a brass cannon smack him where the sun don't shine. And the cannon fired lead shot, which took off the groin of a stuffed bear that was an animal, a stuffed animal that meant some significance to Master Benedict. After all that, that's when Master Benedict shows up with another apothecarist His name is Hugh. Hugh was Master Benedict's previous apprentice. They both come in to see kind of the mess that's in the Blackthorn shop. And Master Benedict is not too pleased about what Christopher and Thomas have been up to. Well, Thomas got off a little bit easier. Thomas got sent home. Christopher got ordered that he basically has to clean everything up from the front steps of the shop all over the shop. So, before he goes to bed. And before chapter 2 ended, we had another apothecarist, a rival one, named Nathaniel Stubbs. And Nathaniel Stubbs came in demanding to see Benedict Blackthorn. Well, Christopher's kind of stuck between a rock and a hard place with this. On one hand, he doesn't have to take orders from another master in his trade because he is not Nathaniel Stubbs' apprentice. He's Benedict Blackthorn. So Benedict told him, you need to clean and leave me alone until I come back. But it's also not appropriate to completely disregard another master apothecarist, especially one like Benedict who sits on the guild board, and it's the guild board that will decide whether you become the master apothecarist or not. They decide whether you graduate or not. So he doesn't respond right away. He hesitates, and which resulted in Nathaniel being very haughty, smacks Christopher in the head with his cane, his walking cane. Hugh gets defensive about it because he says, hey, he's not your apprentice. You don't get to whack other people's apprentices. You just need to back off. And Nathaniel, very in his mind, cleverly pointed out, well, he's not your apprentice either, so buzz off. That's, of course, when Benedict comes back into the main room. He kind of sees what happens, and he basically demands of Nathaniel, what the heck do you want? And Nathaniel says there's been another murder. As we started this, there are a string of murders happening in London, and no one is sure who is committing them or why these murders are being committed. But Nathaniel Stubbs seemed to indicate that Benedict already knew about the murder, this most recent one. And that's where we ended chapter 2, and that's where we left things yesterday. So we will pick back up with chapter 3, and we'll see what Stubb is insinuating with his comment. Hugh closed the book that he had been reading, his fingers still between the pages. Master Benedict laid the rag carefully on the counter and slowly straightened its corners. Who was it? He said. Another apothecary, I thought. My heart began to thump, but it was someone else this time. A lecturer from Cambridge, Stubb poked each word at Master Benedict like a needle. Rented a house in Riverdale for the summer. Pembroke, his name was. Hugh's eyes flickered to my master. The laundry girl found him, Stubbs said. Guts sliced open just like the others. You knew the man, didn't you? Stubb looked like a cat who had cornered a mouse, and I thought he might start purring. Master Benedict regarded him calmly. Christopher? Me? Go clean the pigeon coop, he said. Of course. Why would I want to stay? It's not as if I cared that a man who knew my master had just been murdered, but an apprentice wasn't allowed to argue, so I just left, grumbling under my breath. So, of course, Christopher's sent off. He's not going to hear any more of this conversation. Or at least so we believe. The ground floor of our house had 2 rooms, both set aside for my master's business. The store was in the front, the back held our workshop. It was here 3 years ago I first learned what it meant to be an apprentice. I hadn't known what to expect that day. In Cripplegate, the older boys loved to taunt the younger ones with stories of the cruelties of masters inflicted upon their apprentices. It's like being a prisoner in the tower dungeon. So the tower that they're referring to is the Tower of London, which is infamous for a lot of prisoners being held there. And if you were held at the tower, it was at the king's request. And usually you didn't leave the tower. The only time you left was for your execution. So it's not a place where you want to be. They only let you sleep 2 hours a night, and all you eat is half a slice of moldy bread, and they beat you if you dare to look them in the eye. Seeing Master Benedict for the first time didn't ease my mind in the slightest. When he plucked me from the huddle of boys in the back of the apothecary's Guild Great Hall, I wondered if I had drawn the worst master of all. His face didn't seem unkind, but he was so absurdly tall. The way he towered over an 11-year-old me made me feel like I had just met a talking birch tree. The orphan boys' tales replayed in my mind as I followed Master Benedict to my new home, making my stomach flutter. My new home, my whole life, I had wanted nothing more than to leave the orphanage. Now that my wish was coming true, I was more scared than ever. It was swelteringly hot in the noonday sun, and the piles of animal dung clogging the drains let off the worst stench London had smelled in years. I barely paid attention to it, lost in my own head. Master Benedict, seemingly lost in his own world, barely paid attention to anything at all. What had to be at least 3 pints of urine dumped from a chamber pot out of a second floor window, splashed inches from his feet, and yet he didn't even flinch. So you guys are already kind of getting a picture of what London looked like at this time. Imagine us being stuck at home like we are now, but we don't have indoor plumbing. So you have people that are literally dumping pots of their urine out into the streets because they don't have an indoor toilet, and therefore pipe your urine and sewage waste away from your home to a water treatment center. Not very sanitary, very dirty. As Christopher's describing, him and his master almost got hit with this. So kind of have that picture that this is kind of a dirty world that they're living in. A hinky couch nearly ran him over. A hinkety coach nearly ran him over. The iron-shod wheels clattering over the cobbles. The horses passing so close I could smell their musk. Master Benedict just paused for a mere moment, then continued on toward the shop like he was strolling through the Clerkenwell Green. Maybe he really was a tree. Nothing seemed to faze him. I couldn't say the same. My guts twisted as Master Benedict unlocked the front door to the shop. Above the entryway hung a weathered oaken sign swinging on a pair of silver chains. Blackthorn, released from all manner of malignant humors. Carved leaves of ivy filled it with a deep mossy green, ringed with bright red letters. Underneath, painted in broad gold brush strokes, was a unicorn horn, and the universal symbol for apothecaries. Master Benedict ushered me through the front door and toward the workshop in the back. I craned my neck to see the store, the stuffed animals, the curios, the neatly stocked shelves. But it was the workshop that really made me stop dead and stare. Covering every inch of the workbenches, jammed on the shelves, tucked underneath the rickety stools, were hundreds of apothecary jars, filled with leaves and powders, waters and creams. Around them were endless tools and equipment, molded glassware, heated by oil-fueled flames, liquids bubbling with alien smells, pots and cauldrons, large and small, iron and copper and tin. In the corner, a furnace huffed skin-scalding waves of heat from its gaping mouth, 12 feet wide and 4 feet high. Dozens of experiments had cooked on its 3 racks. glowing coals at one end and a blazing fire at the other. Shaped like a flattened onion, and smooth black curves of the furnace rose to the flue, where a pipe bent away, pumping fumes out the back wall to the mix with the stink of garbage, waste, and manure that wafted over from the London streets. So this is Christopher telling us what his first view of Blackthorn shop was. So this is when he first met Master Benedict. I stood there, open-mouthed, until Master Benedict dropped a cast-iron pot in my hands. "Set the water to boil," he said, and then he waved me onto the stool at the end of the center workbench near the back door, which led to a small herb patch in the alley behind the house. In front of me sat 3 empty pewter mugs, a small glass jar filled with hundreds of tiny black kidney-shaped seeds. Each was about half the size of a ladybug. "This is Mad Apple," he said. "Examine it and tell me what you discover." Nervously, I plucked one of the seeds from the jar and rolled it between my fingers. It smelled faintly of rotten tomatoes. I touched it to the tip of my tongue. It didn't taste any better than it smelled. Bitter and oily with the hint of spice, my mouth almost instantly dried. I told Master Benedict what I experienced. He nodded. "Good. Now take 3 of those seeds and crush them and place them into the first mug. Place 6 into the second, and then 10 in the third. Then pour the boiling water over them and let them steep." I did as he ordered. While the infusion brewed, he asked, "Do you know what asthma is?" "Yes, master," I said. Several children in the orphanage had it. One summer, when the air had been soaked in smoke and stink, 2 boys had died of it on a single day, their own lungs choking the life out of them as the master stood by helplessly, unable to assist. "In small doses," Master Benedict said, "Mad Apple is effective for treating asthma." He pushed the first cup toward me. The 3 crushed seeds swirled at the bottom of the darkening water. It smelled rank. "This is the correct dose for a man of ordinary size." He pushed the second cup toward me. "This amount of mad apple will cause terrible hallucinations, true waking nightmares. Once those are gone, the patient's body will be racked with pain for days." Finally, he handed me the last cup. "This will kill you. Drink it, and in 5 minutes you will be dead." I stared at the mug. I'd just made poison. Stunned. I looked up at Master Benedict to find him watching me intently. "Tell me," he said, "what have you just learned?" I shook off my surprise and tried to think. The obvious answer was the properties of Mad Apple and that the recipes I could make from the seeds. But the way Master Benedict was watching me made me feel like he was looking for something more. "I'm the one who is responsible," I said. Master Benedict's eyebrows shot up. "Yes," he said, sounding pleased. He waved at the herbs, oils, and minerals that surrounded us. "These ingredients are the gifts the Lord has given us. They are the tools of our trade. And what you must always remember, is that they are only that, tools. They can heal or they can kill. It's never the tool itself that decides. It's the hands and the heart of the ones who wield it. Of all of those things I will teach you, Christopher, there is no lesson more important than this. Do you understand?" I nodded, a little in awe and scared of the trust that he had just placed in me. "Good," he said. "Now let's go for a walk and you'll get your final lesson for the day." Master Benedict thrust a heavy leather satchel into my hands and tied his sash with all the glass vials in it around his waist. I kept looking at the sash, fascinated. As he led me back into the streets, the satchel strap digging into my shoulder, he took me to the mansion on the north end of the city. To a boy from Cripplegate, it may as well have been the king's own palace. The liveried servants led us into its vast entryway and asked us to wait. I try not to gawk at the riches that surrounded us, a satin damask on the walls, edged with golden trim, a chandelier overhead, cut glass glittering in the sunlight from the crystal windows, the ceiling above it where the painted horses galloped through trees under the cloudless azure sky. Eventually, a rounded-faced chambermaid led us up to a curved marble staircase to the parlor. A middle-aged woman waited for us there, wearing a loca yellow bodice over a bright orange lustering dress brocaded with flowers. Her dress opened at the bottom to reveal a frilled emerald petticoat. She lay draped over a purple velvet daybed, eating cherries over from a silver bowl. So this kind of gives you a picture that this is a very well-to-do, very well-off family or owner of this house. The woman's high forehead furrowed as she spat out the cherry seeds. Mr. Blackthorn, you are cruel. I have waited for you in torment. Master Benedict bowed slightly. Then he made me jump as he shouted at her as if she was hard of hearing. I apologize for the delay, Lady Lucy. Allow me to introduce Christopher. He stepped aside. Lady Lucy assessed me with a critical eye. Bit young to be an apothecary, aren't you? She said. Oh, no, my lady. I mean, yes, my lady, I stammered. I'm the apprentice. She frowned. Necklace? What in the world do you mean, boy? I glanced over at Master Benedict, but his face was blank. I tried again, shouting this time as Master Benedict had. I'm the apprentice. Well, why didn't you just say that? Get to it, then. My back is the devil's torture. The chambermaid began to untie the laces of Lady Lucy's bodice. Shocked, I looked away. Don't be ridiculous, Lady Lucy said. She turned away from me, holding the silk to her chest as her maid pulled open her bodice in the back. The skin all along her spine was red and raw. It looked unbearably itchy. I glanced over at Master Benedict, unsure what I was supposed to do. This time he motioned toward the satchel I had carried and I looked inside to find a thick ceramic jar. Its wide mouth stopped with the cork. I pulled out the stopper and recoiled in horror. Inside was a chunky, dark brown cream that looked like the back of a baby's diaper. It smelled like it, too. Spread a layer over the rash, Master Benedict said quietly. Thick enough to cover it, but no thicker than that. I shuddered as I slid my fingers into the slime, praying that it wasn't what it felt like. Then I smeared a handful of it over Lady Lucy's back. To my surprise, not only did she not seem to complain about the smell, she sagged visibly in relief as the goo slid over her skin. Sorry, guys, I gotta shut my window. Sounds like some lawn crew is out by my house. Give me 1 sec. Sorry about that, guys. Didn't want you to have me get drowned out by a lawnmower. All right. Here we go. Ah, much better, she sighed. Thank you, Master Blackthorn. We shall return tomorrow, madame, he shouted, and the chambermaid showed us out. I put the apothecary jar back into the satchel. As I did, I saw a woolen rag inside folded at the bottom. I pulled it out on the street, trying to wipe away as much of the foul brown gunk from my fingers as I could. So, Mr. Benedict said, what did you learn from that? I answered without thinking, always bring cotton to stuff your nose. Suddenly, I realized how that sounded. I cringed, expecting Master Benedict to beat me for insolence like the masters at Cripplegate would have. Instead, he blinked at me, then he threw his head back and laughed. A warm, rich sound. It was the first time I remember thinking I'd be all right. Indeed, Master Benedict had said. Well, if you think that was bad, wait until you see what I'll teach you tomorrow. He chuckled. Come on, Christopher, let's go home. He did teach me more the next day, and every day after that. What I'd imagined what being an apothecary would be like, I thought working in the store was where I'd end up. But the workshop at the back became my true home. Here, Master Benedict showed me how to mix an electuary of marshmallow root and honey to soothe the throat, how to grind willow bark and infuse it with a tea to lessen pain, how to combine 60 ingredients over 4 months to make Venice treacle, an antidote for snake venom. He taught me his own secret recipes as well, and codes to decipher them. In this room, I found my future making miracles that came from God's own creation. Some days, anyway. Today, all I got was some grain and a bucket and a poop scooper. With my master and Stubb in the next room, I grabbed what I needed and left. All right, so we're back to Stubb being there to talk about the most recent murder. Now we're back from memory lane. The door opposite to the giant oven led to the upper floors with steep stairs so old that the lightest step made them squeal like a frightened donkey. On the second floor was the kitchen, small but functional, and the pantry, which kept the occasional loaf of bread or a wheel of cheese or some smoked fish or a cask or two of ale. The rest of the rooms were stuffed with supplies for the workshop. Part of the third floor was kept for storage, too, but for Master Benedict's other passions, books. The only thing that compared to my master's obsession with discovering new recipes was his obsession with discovering new books. He passed that on to me, too. Besides our daily lessons, Mr. Benedict expected me to study on my own, not just recipes and how raw materials reacted, but from his endlessly growing collection of tomes. From these, I learned philosophy, history, theology, languages, the natural sciences, whatever else sparked my master's imagination during his weekly trips to see his friend Isaac, the bookteller. A landing at the top of the main stairs swung around to Master Benedict's private rooms. More books lined the walls, making the passage so slight you had to squeeze against the railing to get to the door opposite of my master's quarters. A ladder led up to a hatch in the ceiling. I unbolted it and climbed into the evening chill. The roof of our home was flat. I liked coming up here on the hot summer nights where the air was cooler and high above the cobbles, not nearly as rank with smell of the streets. Tonight, unfortunately, I wasn't spared. The winds were blowing from the northeast, sending the stink of the boiled fat and urine from the soap maker's shop 4 streets away. We housed our birds up here in the walk-in wood and wire coop at the back corner of the balcony. They fluttered their wings noisily as I unlatched the hook to their shelter. A few of the bolder ones poked out there around my shirtless sleeves when I had entered, losing interest when they saw the bucket I carried was empty. One pigeon, a plump, salt and pepper speckled girl, flapped down from her perch and tapped at my toes. Hello, Bridget, I said. She cooed. I put the scraper on the dirt and picked her up. She was warm, her feathers soft in my fingers. I got kicked out, I complained to her. Again. Bridget nuzzled her head against my thumb in sympathy. I cradled her in the crook of my elbow and pulled a handful of barley from my pocket, watching absently as she pecked the grain out of my palm. My mind was still on the conversation that I'd been booted out of. Stubb had always been a slimy thing, but the way that he had eyed our shop made my stomach twist. It was no secret that my master's business did well, and it was equally no secret that Stubb didn't like the competition. I knew he had tried to buy our shop several years back. After Master Benedict refused to sell it, Stubb accused my master of stealing his recipes. No one took him seriously, but tonight it made me wonder, how far would a man like Stubb go to get what he wanted? And why was he here taunting Master Benedict about the murders? Did he know something about them? 6 men had been butchered now, 3 of them apothecaries, and the latest victim knew my master. Closer and closer, I thought, tightening like a noose. I shivered, and not from the cold. Important things were being said downstairs. Yet here I was, stuck on the roof. Well, Master Benedict could set me away if he wanted to, but if I finished my duties up here, I'd have to return to the shop. And if I happened to overhear something, I said to Bridget, that wouldn't be my fault, would it? I took Bridget's silence for agreement and got to work. The floor of the coop was thick with grayish white gunk, Bridget flapping from shoulder to shoulder, nibbling at the hair behind my ears. As I scraped the top layer of poop off the dirt and slopped it into the bucket, when I was done, I'd lifted Bridget from my collar and set her in the straw at the back, far from the draft, where she could be warm and snug. I'll bring you breakfast in the morning, I said. She bobbed her head at me and cooed goodbye. We didn't keep birds just for fun. Pigeon poop was valuable. Sometimes we sold a bit of it to the market gardens. It was particularly good for growing asparagus, but we made something out of much more precious than fertilizer. Back in the shop, I unsealed a cask in the corner. The stink that blasted from the barrel nearly made me pass out. Gagging, I dumped what I had scraped from the coop into the slop inside. Then topped the whole thing up by unbuttoning my fly, and peeing into it. Another job for the apprentice. Afterward, I resealed the cask. I wouldn't open it again for 3 more months. Then, when I had washed the nasty mix out and put it into the trays in the sun where it would dry into spiky white crystals of saltpeter. When I had finally finished, I crept to the door and put my ear to the wood, half expecting the conversation to be over. But whatever they were talking about must have been really important. Stubb was still here, and he was near to shouting. "Change is coming, Benedict," he said. "You want to be on the right side this time." "I don't have a side, Nathaniel," my master said. "These squabbles don't involve me." "Perhaps gold will then. With the right connections and the right backing, we could make a fortune." "Money is not the issue," Mr. Benedict said. "I have no part in any of this. You have the wrong man." Stubbs snorted. "Don't pretend all you like. You'll choose one way or another." There was another pause. "Is that a threat?" my master said. Stubbs' voice became as smooth as oil. "Of course not, Benedict. After all, what do I have to do with this sordid business? Nothing. Nothing at all." I heard Stubbs' heavy footsteps, and then the creak and slamming of the front door. For a moment there was silence. Then Hugh spoke to my master so quietly I had to squash my ear up against the wood to hear him. "What do we do now?" "We be careful," Master Benedict said. "And if Pembroke talked, he wouldn't." "Not everyone can stand under torture," Hugh said. "No, but Nathaniel wouldn't know that anyway. He's just guessing." "A bloody good guess." "Stubb's not the problem," Master Benedict said. "It's that apprentice we need to watch out for." I frowned. What apprentice? What did he mean? "There are 6. 3 of the 6 were right, Benedict," Hugh said. "We can no longer tell ourselves that this is a coincidence. If Stubb can figure us out, it's only a matter of time before the others do. Simon's already fled the city." "To where?" "France. Paris, I think. He'll have nothing to do with us anymore." There was a pause. Do you want to leave too? You know I don't, Hugh said, but we can't keep this up forever. Stubb was right about that. We have to make a choice, and we have to make one soon. My master sighed. I know. When Master Benedict opened the door to the workshop, I pretended that I had just finished with the cask. I'm afraid I can't eat with you tonight, he said. I have to go out. That wasn't unusual. Master Benedict often left the home in the evening, not returning until well after I'd gone to sleep. Yes, master, I said. He heard the catch in my voice. What's wrong? He said. Are you upset about before? Come here. He put his arms around my shoulders. I'm sorry I was cross with you, he said. But God's breath, Christopher, sometimes you make me wonder if Blackthorn will still be standing when I come home. You must think before you act. I know, master. You're right. I'm not upset about that, though I still didn't want to scrub the floors. Then what's the matter? What did Stubb want? I said. Master Stubb, he chided gently, wanted the same thing he always wants, a quick path to riches. Then why was he talking about the murders? Ah, so that's what's troubling you. Now that I'd finally said it out loud, the rest rushed out like the Thames after the spring thaw. Now, the Thames, for those of you that don't know, that is the river that runs through the city of London in England. It sets on the Thames. There's a gang of assassins on the loose, and no one can stop them. And Tom thinks it's the Catholics, but his mother thinks it's the Puritans. But I think it's worse than either. And even the king is scared, and you knew the last man they murdered, and they're killing apothecaries. I took a breath. So, Master Benedict said, well, we're apothecaries. We are? Benedict looked surprised. So we are. How nice for us. Master! He laughed affectionately. Never mind the murders, boy. Your imagination will stop your heart. There is no gang of assassins. No one is hunting apothecaries. And Nathaniel Stubb is harmless. But he threatened you, I almost cried out before I realized that would have revealed I had been eavesdropping. I floundered for something to say and finally said on, so we'll be safe? As the king's breeches, he said. Now settle down. I am in no danger, and as long as you don't build any more firearms, neither are you. There is nothing to worry about. Master Benedict patted me on the shoulder. I promise. I wanted to believe him, but I wasn't sure that I did. I mean, someone was murdering these poor people, and it sounded like Hugh felt the same. Excuse me. 3 of the 6 were right, Hugh said. We can no longer tell ourselves this is a coincidence. What did that mean? Nothing good, I was sure. Whatever it was, they clearly weren't going to tell me. And if I wanted to find out, I have to do some more eavesdropping. Either way, I couldn't do anything about it tonight. Hungry, I sliced a hunk of cheese from the wheel and in the larder of my supper and downed it with a mug of beer. Then I did my punishment. I wrote out the cannon recipe in English and Latin until my hand cramped. Then scoured the floors and the steps all the way to the roof. Then, when I finally had finished, 3 hours past nightfall, I barred the front door, shuttered the windows, and then crawled under the shop counter to my placie and fell fast asleep. A noise woke me. At first, I thought it came from the street. Then I heard it again from the other side of the counter. A ceramic jar clanked against the shelf. I had sealed up the shop before I'd gone to sleep. I hadn't barred the back door to the workshop so Master Benedict could return, but it was locked, and only my master and I knew where the key was hidden. And Master Benedict always entered the house through the workshop and went straight upstairs. He never came to the front. But there it was again, a footfall and the gentle creak on the floorboards. Someone was here. Let me see here, guys. All right. I will read chapter 4. Chapter 3 is a little bit long, but I will read chapter 4. I reached under the straw, groping for my knife. My heart hammered at my ribs. A plan. I needed a plan. I thought of several. I could jump out and surprise them. I could run and call for help, or I could stay where I was and wet myself. I gave option 3 some serious consideration, but if this was a burglar, he'd come around the counter. The most valuable remedies we had were here on the shelves a few feet above my head. And if it was an assassin, I gripped my knife as if it were Excalibur. In reality, it was a 2-inch blade, loose in the handle and dull as a millstone. The thing had a hard time slicing apples. I pushed myself to my knees and peeked over the counter. The coals in the fireplace still glowed softly. I couldn't see the intruder, but the dull red light cast a shadow of him on the wall. A huge shadow. He was a giant, incredibly, impossibly tall. All right then, fighting was right out. Fighting and wetting myself was not a plan. So, option number 2, sneak to the front, unbolt the door, run outside, scream like a girl. But Master Benedict, I thought, what if he comes home? I couldn't just leave him. The giant moved away from the shelves. He was carrying a ceramic jar and not doing a very good job of it. He struggled, grunting, lowered it on with a thunk on the table near the fireplace. Now that he was closer to the auburn glow of the coals, I could see the intruder better. He wasn't a giant at all. The man was tall, yes, but still human size. And while the shadow showed him, made him look broad, he was actually quite skinny. In fact, he looked exactly the same shape as my master, I said. Master Benedict leaned against the table. Yes, go to sleep. Not likely. My heart was still thumping like His Majesty's cannons. What was he doing with a jar in the middle of the night? Are you all right? I said. Yes, Christopher, I am fine. Go back to sleep. I went to the fireplace, using the coals to light the wick of the lamp on a lamp. And when the lantern flared, I nearly dropped it. Master Benedict looked like he had just come back from a war. His wig was gone. His short gray hair revealed, spiked and dirty. His clothes were caked with mud, and blue underneath was only a memory. There was something black smeared all over the right side of his face. It looked like soot. Did someone attack you? I said. Was it Stubb? Sherback? Was it the killers? No, he tried to turn away, but his movements were clumsy and twitching. I took his arm. Let me help you. I'm fine, he said. Please, master, let me take you to your room. For a moment, he nodded. I lifted his right arm to wrap on me. He cried out in pain. It was then that I saw his coat was torn at the shoulder. I took him through the back and upstairs, the lantern lighting our way. His weight resting on me seemed to grow with every creaking step. At the top, I nudged the door open with my hip and brought him inside. Master Benedict's bedroom smelled faintly of Egyptian incense. Against one wall next to the fireplace was a narrow bed with plain brown cotton sheets and a single pillow. A simple table stood beside it, one short leg steadied underneath with folded sheepskin. The chamber pot rested on a rose-carved elm chair near the desk at the open window. The desk was covered with papers and ash dust from the incense holder blown off by the night's breeze. The rest of the space was piled with books, stacks and stacks and more stacks, each one at least a dozen high. Isaac the bookseller, I thought, must be swimming in gold. I weaved my master through the books to the bed and laid him as gently as I could. I looked at him for a moment, unsure what to do. Master Benedict trained you, I told myself. You are ready for this. It calmed me. I lit the lantern on the table using my own, and closed the window shutters and poked at the coals dying in the fire to give him some warmth. Then I looked him over. Downstairs, I thought his coat was torn, but in the better light, the charred, crumbling wood and blackened skin underneath gave the truth away. He had been burned. My heart burned, too, toward whoever had hurt him. Rest for a moment, master, I said. I ran down to the workshop, trying to remember everything my master had taught me about treating burns. I hauled 2 buckets of water up to his room. Then I went back and searched the shelves for the remedies that I needed. One of them, a cream of powdered silver, was already out. The one my master had pulled down when I was asleep. I balanced the jars in my arms and added a small tin pot full of water and a mug on top of it, then went upstairs. Master Benedict lay on the pillow, breathing slowly. He wanted me to place the pot on the fire and lined up the jars on the table beside him. I started to pull off his coat, but he flinched when I lifted his arm, so I used my knife to cut it away at the seams. It was ruined anyway. Its future value was only to be rags. I was relieved to see that while the skin on his shoulder was blistered, he wasn't badly burned. I washed away the soot and that from his face too. I scooped dried poppies from one of the jars into the water boiling in the pot on the fire. After a minute, I poured it at that bed. Poppy was the best pain reliever God had gifted the world with, and the infusion would relax him as well. Master Benedict sipped at it as I worked. I smeared the silver cream on his burn to prevent the flesh from rotting. Then I wrapped cloth around it, tying it under his arm and remove what was left of his filthy clothes. He looked so frail. He had never seemed old to me. But tonight I saw every year in him, all age, skin, and bones. Still, otherwise, he appeared unharmed except for his palms, which had been cracked and raw. The wounds didn't look like burns, so I lathered his hands with aloe sap and wrapped them as I did his shoulder. You've learned so much, he said softly. I flushed, embarrassed but proud. Thank you, master. He began to speak again, but his voice choked. His eyes were wet, ringed with red. My heart ached. I'd never seen him cry before. Can I do anything more? I said. He reached out and touched my cheek with his fingertips. You're a good boy, he said. I couldn't find any words. I just bowed my head and leaned into the warmth of his hand. His eyelids began to get droopy. The poppy tea was working. I had helped him lie down again and pulled the covers over him. Sleep well, master. I extinguished the lantern on the table and I carried the other one to the door before he spoke. Wait. He stared into the flame of the lantern. It flickered, tendrils of smoke dancing over the glass. It's Oak Apple Day tomorrow, he said. Yes, the king's birthday. And your own. He remembered. Did you and Tom collect your oak sprigs? He said. This morning. I was wondering why he had stopped me for that. And then he said, his voice nearly whispered, Do I ask too much of you? I wasn't sure what he meant. Master? I asked. No one ever gave you the choice, he said. The orphanage made you study. The guild gave you the test. I brought you here. No one ever gave you the choice. He looked into my eyes. If I sent you away to walk a different path, he said, somewhere you'd be safe, somewhere you couldn't be hurt, would you choose it? His question stunned me. Had any master ever allowed his apprentice to choose? I remembered his secret conversation with you. We have to make a choice, and soon. When the killings had started 4 months ago, Tom and I teased each other that the assassins were coming to get us. It didn't take long for the jokes to stop, as the reality of what was happening to our city began to weigh on us. Tonight, alone in the dark, I had been more scared than I had ever been before. And I still was. Part of me wanted to go somewhere safe. No stub, no killers, nothing more to fear. But that was us together. Leave Master Benedict behind? I couldn't, and I wouldn't. I said it with conviction, so he'd know it too. No, Master, I am grateful for the life you have given me. Whatever happens, I want to stay with you. He didn't say anything. I waited at the door, not sure if he wanted me to go. I got the sense that he wasn't sure either. Finally, he spoke. I have something for you. He pointed to a small package wrapped in linen resting at the top of one of the book stacks. What is it? I said. A present. I was stunned. The last 2 oak apple days Master Benedict had brought home my favorite fresh roasted pig for supper. He had eaten sparingly, mostly watching with amusement as I stuffed my face with the sweet white meat, slurping grease from my fingers. I had always thought the pigs were special for the holiday. Now I wondered if he really bought them for me. But this, I never got an actual present before. Can I can I open it? I suppose. It must be past midnight by now. So tomorrow's officially today. He nodded. Go on then. I pulled at the cloth. It fell away. I lost I lost my breath. Underneath was a polished silvery cube slightly bigger than my palm. On the engraved in the metal were fine smooth grooves in a series of circles. So that's what's on top of the cube. With trembling fingers, I turned it around. On each of the other faces, a single symbol was engraved on all 5. So these are the symbols that are engraved on each side of it. These symbols right up here. It's beautiful, I said. Do you recognize the metal? I tapped one side with a fingernail. It wasn't silver. It didn't quite feel like tin either. I bounced it in my hand. It weighed a little more than a plum. Antimony? Good. Otherwise known as the Black Dragon. Some say it has a mystical properties, but it makes you throw up if you eat it. Excellent. I hugged the cube to my chest. Thank you so much. Don't get too excited, his eyes twinkled. That's only half of your present. My jaw dropped. There's more? You get the rest. You get the rest if you can open it. For a moment I wasn't sure what he meant. Then I realized what he was talking about the cube. It opens. I held it close to the lantern, a quarter of an inch below the top, a line traced around it, almost too fine to see. I tried to pry it off, but the top wouldn't budge. How do I? Benedict smiled. I told you. You get the rest, if you can open it. I shook the cube. Inside, something rattled. What is it? That would spoil the surprise, now wouldn't it? But I do think you might need a little help on this one. He was nearly asleep now, his voice beginning to slur. I'll tell you this. The key is downstairs, somewhere in the shop. And that, he pointed to the book the cube had been resting on, will help you find it. All right, so that's the end of chapter 4. Chapter 5 is going to start on, will be the official Oak Apple Day. Will be Friday, May 29th, and the year is still 1665. So we will put a bookmark in our book there. And we will pick up with our story tomorrow. Hopefully, maybe we'll find out more about this cube that Master Benedict gave Christopher, and maybe Christopher will figure out how to open it. We'll see. He's definitely got a couple clues of how to figure that out. All right. So thank you so much for joining me today. Be sure to check Dojo. I did post on Dojo today the Zoom meeting information for any student or family that wishes to join the Zoom call. That will take place at 10 o'clock and will go till 11 o'clock. This will be kind of like, I'm going to treat it as kind of like a meetup. It's kind of like students can come in, they can be able to check in with me, discuss, how things are going, if they need help with anything. But a big part of it is it's going to give an opportunity for them to meet with their fellow classmates. I know a lot of you guys have been saying that my kid is missing talking with his friends. He wants to see his classmates and, be able to interact with me more than, maybe you guys can here on YouTube. So that'll be at 10 o'clock. I did post that information on our class story. So it'll have a link to the Zoom meeting, and it'll have the password that you'll need to get in. And that'll be part of my office hours tomorrow starting at 10 o'clock. So if you and your student want to join me there, that's when you can do it. And the information's there on Dojo. Thank you so much for joining me for the Read-Aloud today. This will be Mr. Getting Off, and I will see you guys tomorrow.